most of the regulation comes after it's entered the market, with the exception of two categories that we find we always have to remind clients about. So one of the emphasis of the MAHA movement is this idea of traditionally foods could come into commerce if the ingredient was considered to be generally recognized as safe. But a company could decide whether it was generally recognized as safe on its own and referred to as a self-GRAS process. There's been some pushback on whether that is appropriate and whether instead you should have to go through what's referred to a food additive process of getting approval from the agency. I think that's where you might see some change in the future, but it's going to take years of kind of back and forth with the rulemaking process. For cosmetics, generally you don't have to have pre-market approval for any of the ingredients unless it's a color additive. I mean, there's basically an understanding that for those ingredients they can present unique safety considerations. So you would find that, for example, some colors are permitted in your hair, but you can't put it around your eyes or things like that. And I think what's been really interesting is seeing that as more and more companies want to bring products that are used freely in other countries into the US, are having to really acknowledge ways in which our system hasn't necessarily modernized or hasn't permitted certain ingredients for use, or an alternative where we're permitted to use ingredients here that are no longer permitted outside of the US. I know that typically when people say cosmetics, they think all personal care. I think a big nuance I always have to flag is in the US, there is a difference between a product that's just for beautification versus something that is supposed to affect the structure or function of the body. So if you're like reducing fine lines or wrinkles, FDA actually thinks those products are drugs. And so a nuance we often are seeing in the cosmetic space is people wanting to market products here without triggering a drug classification that would require pre-market approval. And so we're figuring out more ways to help companies know how to modify claims to avoid that, or if they want to be able to get into market, figuring out how to take advantage of some new pathways for over-the-counter drugs, et cetera, to permit more innovation.